Good afternoon, Miami. David Winker. I had the pleasure of being here today with Palmetto Bay Council member Steve Cody.
Thank you, David. It's good to be here.
Nice to be here. We've never seen each other face to face.
We have not, and I guess our lives have sort of run complementary tracks over the years.
Exactly. You, when I was a young attorney, you were involved in many social justice issues.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, at least my first question for you, just to give some background to everyone listening. If you're not aware who Steve Cody is, Steve Cody ran for council member in 2020.
Yep.
And you beat David Singer.
Yep.
By
498
votes. He was the incumbent.
He was the incumbent.
And I'm going to ask you about how that was and everything. But and when you describe to me that race, what were the issues? What was going on? What? Let me back up. I hate to do this. What made you run?
Well, actually, the year before, the summer before, I got approached by some people in the village, and I was asked to run against David. David has a bit of a disruptive streak in him. In kindergarten, I'm pretty sure they wrote down, does not play well with others. And my wife had just passed away. And I said, guys, my head's just not into this right now. I can't make a decision. Same group came back to me a little while later, a few months later, and said, well, don't worry about it. We have found 5 people who are all lined up in Seriatim. And so they've all promised that they will run against David. But if everybody drops out,
you're the 6th one.
You're the 6th. Would you promise? And I take promises seriously.
Oh, is that right? So they said if each of these fail, if each of these backs out,
yep,
you have to promise to be. Wow.
So, and I thought, sure, I'll promise, because what's the chances of that happening?
Yeah. What are the Vegas odds of that?
Right. And that summer, in fact, we're coming up almost on the anniversary, or those of us who have suffered limb loss call it our ampuversary, where I lost my right foot. And so I just come out of the hospital, developed an infection, had to go back into the hospital. They had to reopen up everything, come back out. And it's right before the end of qualifying. And I get a call and they say, everybody's dropped out.
Guess what? We're collecting on the bet.
Well, yeah. And I thought to myself, you know what? And people were afraid because David takes things personal to the ultimate level. Just as an example, recently, he sent me a text asking me how my wife is, knowing full well that I'm a widower. But that's the kind of guy he is. So they asked me, or they told me, you're up. Can we get you to collect on the promise? And it came with a caveat that, you're getting in so late, you don't have to win, just rough him up a little bit. And I thought about it, and it's like, you know what? I lost my wife last year. I lost my leg this year. I had COVID-19 twice.
Wow.
And I said, what the hell could David do to me that's worse than I've already suffered? Yeah, I'll do it. And by the way, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to beat him. So I filed my paperwork on the last possible day, almost at the last hour. There wasn't a chance for someone else to come into the race to try to make it a 3-way race like they did with Ed Silva and Al John Farquharson and Leanne Tellem. And then it just became between David and I. And he tried to make the race about me. And I made the race more about our future in Palmetto Bay. And I also focused on his inability to hold his temper. He provided a lot of great material.
And let me ask a question about that. So how was, your background is in, I'd say, politics. You've been involved in campaigns. How was it to be
the candidate,
the man, like the guy, how did it, like, to be in the ring? How was that experience in a campaign? We're going to get to being a politician.
Yeah.
But in the actual campaign, how was it for you?
In the campaign, well, it was actually very liberating, because I have given advice to candidates, legal and messaging and all kinds of other stuff. And sometimes candidates want to play it very, very safe. And when you play it safe, everybody's playing safe, you just get lost in the clutter. And so I called up a young man that I've worked on a lot of campaigns with, Pedro Diaz Consulting Group. And I said, Pedro, if you'll help me, we're going to run the campaign that we've always wanted to run, but no one had the guts to do it.
That's interesting.
So a large part of my campaign dealt with humor. And that's how we broke through the clutter. And it helped that David reacted the way you would expect somebody who thinks that he's too important to be laughed at throughout this whole thing.
So tell me, so that goes, and it's interesting. We're going to get to, we have David Singer in the comments here.
I
And we're
can't
going to
even
talk
see
about
my
that.
vision
So
is.
his comment is, "Oh my God, this guy is such a pathological liar. It's good theater."
Oh, good. Good.
But here's
Thank
what
you,
we're going to
David.
do. We're going to have lots of comments. I'm going to go through them. I'll read them to you as we go. It's like Grandpa Miller. Grandpa Miller can't see the comments, but I'll read them for you. Also, I'm going to get to the relationship with David Singer and to the relationship with the government. You know how it goes. I mean, the critics of the government, and we're going to get into some of the policy issues. But I think that so you run the campaign. Mm-hmm. The way that you've set it up is there are lowered expectations. You're in late. Well, you lost a leg. We know what you're going through. You're the sixth choice.
Right. Well,
lowered expectations. How did that fit into your, like, what did that mean for you as a person running?
What it meant was, again, having worked on enough campaigns over the years, tell David to stop calling you.
That's not, it's actually, that is not David. I need to turn off this ringer.
But I knew that my opponent was going to be somebody who had a problem with impulse control. And so I sat back for 2 weeks, didn't advertise. The only thing that I put out was a picture of City Hall with a slogan, "Can a man with just 1 foot run and win a race in Palmetto Bay?" ? Let's find out. It's the only thing that I put out.
It's 2 weeks that sits there.
That it just sat there. And David came after me. It was kind of like a rope-a-dope. He came after me with everything he had. I've got a lot of baggage in my life. I'll admit that. But he went on and on and on and on and on about it. Didn't have the impulse control to say, okay, I'm going to set up my message calendar. So I'm doing this week, this next week, and I'm going to plan it out. Nope. He had to get it all done at once. He had to get everything done in the first 2 minutes, which may describe other aspects of his life. I'm not sure. But so by the time a couple of weeks of that, people were saying, okay, well, what else you got? We've heard this. What else have you got? And he kept repeating that. And
it's interesting you say that, because I followed tangentially the campaign, and I always say, like, I do what I do for a living because I'm not good at politics. Things happen all the time in politics that make no sense to me, and I can't figure it out. And I'm used to being somebody who walks into a room and can kind of figure out what's going on. And politics, admittedly, are beyond me. People win sometimes. I can't imagine them winning. People lose, I think, would win. And I followed tangentially your election. I knew who you were. I knew who David Singer was. I found it interesting, and we're going to talk about some of the dynamics. I find conflict as a good thing interesting sometimes, and conflict can be negative too. But we're lawyers. We're used sometimes conflict, like the battle, I think sometimes makes things better. But in your campaign, the one thing that I've learned is if you're going to go negative, you got to wait. Like, it's like, hold your fire until you see the whites of their eyes. And in your campaign, the negativity started from day one. And like, it kind of like it's like what you said. It's like everyone's like heard that, digested it. It's almost like, I don't know if you ever heard this before. When I talk to clients, it's like I think the first rule of crisis management is tell the truth, tell the whole truth, and tell it all at once.
Right.
And it's like, I think the corollary of that is in campaigning. It's like, if you do that, if the other side does that for you, gets all your dirty baggage out, well, that means it kind of goes away, right? It's like, okay, we've heard that. We've digested that.
Right.
That's old news.
Right. Well, for instance, David has a problem, again, with impulse control. And I figured I could use that with humor. I did one spot where I took a council meeting where he had a tantrum. He got up, he threw things, he'd missed a meeting, and then wanted to go back and reopen all the issues that had been decided. And he was not allowed to do that. So he got up and, was reminded that you have to stay seated if you want to make a comment. He blew up, he stormed around, he yelled from the area where you could still see him on camera. He went to the back of the auditorium, was screaming from there. So I said, I can do something with this. I took that and I made a video where I was using my grandfather voice, grandfather of 2, and I just talked about tantrums. And I said, when kids are really young, they will throw tantrums. And I had a little clip of a little boy who was about 2 and he wanted coffee. And of course, the grandpa voice said, don't give your children coffee. And then another little girl was upset because her baby sister had a fever and she wanted a fever too. And then I cut to David having his tantrum there. And I said, most of the time children grow out of tantrums, but not always. And then we cut to that. And I got a lot of very good response to that because I was calling David out in a humorous way for his inability to control himself.
So tell me, it's election night.
Yep.
Were you surprised you won?
No, because Pedro Diaz is an excellent campaign consultant. We were doing, this campaign season, nobody could go door to door. Because of my missing foot, I was in a wheelchair. I couldn't go door to door. So we used social media a lot. We also fenced a lot of, so our message, I could target a message around one early voting site. And if you were 500 feet away, you would never get that either text message or Facebook message. But if you were within that, you would get it. We did a lot of phone calling. We probably touched probably 2/3 of the voters who voted in that election. So at least they were aware of my name. I got a lot of feedback from people. If I didn't put out a humorous, I was doing at least 1 or 2 a week ads.
They're like, where's the ad?
I would get criticism. We were expecting this one to be funny, and it was not. So that would make me one of the things that I knew that took David off the message for a long time was he spent a lot of money on a video with his son as the spokesperson. I didn't bring my kids into the campaign because I don't like that. You're running on your ideas, your ability, your talents, and not whether you can reproduce or not. So, that makes no sense to me. But he went ahead and did it. And his son, Jeremy, had a line where he basically called everybody on the other side liars. So, and at the time here, community newspapers put out a column, which David took to be an endorsement, but it used words like, can't control his temper and, several things that you would never think would be in an endorsement. So I took some video. I learned to do all this stuff myself, of David talking with Michael Miller. And I put that audio way down and I wanted to have people understand what was in that column. So I had a computer generate a voice of a young man of about maybe 10, 12, and I called it Jeremy. And that just drove David nuts. If there had only been one Jeremy in like Cher or Beyonce, but there's not just one little boy in this town, and he put him out there. So that made him fair game. So at the end of the commercial, where he reads all the critical comments, the little boy's voice, he mentions that, wow, he needs a time out. And I responded by saying, yes, for the next 4 years. Thanks, Jeremy. And the Jeremy voice goes, hey, no problem, Mr. Cody. And that took David off of the campaign trail for 2 weeks. He couldn't think of anything else.
So tell me this. So it's interesting. So this brings us to 2 questions I have for you. One is, I find it interesting in the era of new media. Not that Palmetto Bay always got, Miami Herald attention type thing,
mm-hmm.
but we're in a new time where it's really hard, as somebody who's active in civic issues, it's hard to get attention. It's hard to get ink on local issues. And I have viewed kind of what I'd say like this feud between you and David. So let me talk.
Okay.
But let
Okay.
me talk post. So I think I want to get into that.
Okay.
But it is interesting. Like when you talk about your campaign relied very little on media coverage and really more on you communicating directly
Sure.
with
Social
voters,
media.
right?
Yeah.
And so I want to kind of apply that to what we're going to, that we move on. So you talked to me about campaigning. You ran the campaign you wanted to run, right?
That
You've
I
watched
always
it
wanted to
your
run.
whole life. You've watched it.
Yep.
You've been involved. Tell me about how is it being an elected official? And I'm going to ask you because I find it fascinating because I find when I always say what's the saying? We get the government we deserve and we deserve the government we get. And I have no interest in running for office personally. And I think about the reasons why. And because I like what I do, whatever. And it doesn't, I think I am sympathetic to politicians because I don't think it's a fun job. I think it's a lot of work. I think it's asking money from people. I think it's like being a preacher and that you got to solve everyone's problems. You're giving all the time. Tell me, how has it been being a politician for you? Are you enjoying it?
I'm having a great time because I like interacting with people. People come to me with their problems. And if I can help, and if I can help them figure out a way, there was one gentleman whose neighbor was basically processing compost in his big backyard. And I was able to alert the village attorney and the village manager and the people in code enforcement. And they went out and basically put a stop to it and let him know that if he did it again, we'd start putting daily fines and liens on his property. And I think he's gone back to it. We're going to go check that. And if so, we may have the ability to foreclose on the liens on his property from the daily fines,
Right.
and get him to move out of the neighborhood. I have had other people come to me and said, can we commemorate something? I don't like the way this particular thing is turning out. And sometimes I agree with them. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I agree and disagree with the people on the council, but it has never gotten to the point, and I talked about this when I gave my speech after being sworn in, that my attitude is that we're going to consider an issue, we're going to debate the issue, we're going to take a vote on the issue, and as far as I'm concerned, regardless of where I fall, win or lose, my next question is going to be, Madam Mayor, what's next? Because we don't have the time in our community to focus on an issue for 3 or 4 years and clutch your pearls and say, but I was right. Put it behind you.
So on that note, I got to tell you, so we got a comment from one of my favorite commenters, Lisa Myers. And Lisa Myers criticizing me. We're talking about criticizing. Lisa is criticizing me, saying,
well, I thought Lisa was David's alter ego.
Well, she says, with so many pressing issues in our village, and Winker is doing a memory lane about Singer and Cody. Wow. So I do want to, Lisa.
Do you think that David puts a dress on when he types as Lisa Myers just to get in character?
I didn't know that. I think Lisa is a real person.
I don't know.
But Lisa has a very good. Lisa is a real person. Lisa makes a very good point, and I want to get down to issues. But before I do,
sure,
I do want to talk about conflict. I joke sometimes with David Singer that he runs a government in exile from this desk at community newspapers.
Well, he runs it with Gene Flynn and Ed Silva. And there's a title I've given to the three of them to replace his gloves off program. But yeah.
And it's called, and we will say it, it's Loser's Corner. And
right.
We all laugh when we hear Loser's Corner.
Right.
So Loser's Corner is the government in exile.
Right. And for some reason, they can't accept the fact that they lost. And that, of course, they have better ideas than the sitting council people. If they had better ideas, they would have been elected or reelected. It didn't happen. And so now they get to complain and kvetch about what's going on. You can't practice law in Miami for 32 years without picking up a little Yiddish here and there, right? But they don't focus on how do we make things better. their sole focus, and they're hiding behind a pack to say, oh, it's terrible, it's terrible. Oh, and it's all Karen's fault, all Karen Cunningham's fault. Even things that I have done. I'm the one who proposed that we raise the franchise fee because stupidly, the prior people on the council, Gene and David, voted to lower the franchise fee, thinking that the growth fairy would show up and cause such immense growth that would take care of that downturn in revenue, and suddenly we'd have much more. Well, the tooth fairy isn't real, and neither is the growth fairy. And that's why we had to go through and get that. But this little group they have, A Better Palmetto Bay, they went after Karen about it, even though I was the one who sponsored it. I was the one who pushed it. I was the one who did the research. And yet it was Karen's fault.
And so let's talk. So I do want to talk about some of the issues, and I'll get into some of the comments. That anytime I find it interesting, because anytime I do a show that involves Palmetto Bay, it gets 70 plus comments. Like, people are very active, and we're going to talk about that. And I want to talk about why that is, but I also want to talk about issues. So when I think of Palmetto Bay, one of the issues right now is this idea of the background checks at the park.
Right.
That issues come up.
Yep.
Talk to me about your perspective. We'll give the background. So there's a farmer's market.
Right. Full
disclosure. Miller brother does it. Yep. These guys, his brother runs that thing. And it came to the attention that people were not doing background checks on people who work there.
Right.
So give me the background.
Okay. Well, after a young woman named Shannon Melendi was killed in Atlanta, she was scorekeeping at a softball game. The guy who was umpiring abducted her and killed her. And he had been a convicted sex offender. We in Dade County, because Shannon was a Dade County resident, Dade County native, passed the Shannon Melendi, well, it's called an act, but it was really an ordinance, requiring that certain persons who are conducting business on county parks have to go through background checks. Now, Palmetto Bay passed its own mini Shannon Melendi Act. And the problem is that the people who are calling and criticizing are wanting us to enforce the act for what they want it to say and not for what the act actually says. First of all, it applies to everybody who's involved in a child-centered event. So if you have kids softball, kids baseball, kids soccer, kids football, things like that, you have to have background checks for everyone who is involved. However, for something like the farmer's market, it only applies to the vendor who's gotten the contract from the village to run that. And the reason we know that's true is that there was a farmer's market 1.0, which was not run by Scott Miller in that same park. And this was when Gene Flynn was the mayor, and this is when Ed Silva was the manager. Well, they didn't require anyone to have background, none of the people who were actually manning the booths and selling their wares. And the reason they did, because the definitions that are there, that was defined as a fair, but fairs only had to have everybody checked if they had amusement rides. That one never had amusement rides. Scott Miller's doesn't have amusement rides, but they want it to apply. And that may be something that perhaps if they want to get a petition together to have a referendum to change the act, that's fine. But they're using the idea that we didn't check as political fodder to go after Karen Cunningham. That, oh, she didn't check, or a manager didn't check. Well, we didn't do it when Ed Silva on Farmers Market #1 was. And I even asked him Thursday, I typed in a comment and I said, Ed, why didn't you do this? And Ed always reminds me of cartoon shop guy from The Simpsons. Well, just because one person didn't do it doesn't mean that everybody else is relieved of it. And so I then asked him, so you're admitting you were negligent in not enforcing it with that hold? But it wasn't a question of that. It didn't apply to that farmer's market for the individual sellers. It doesn't apply to this one for the individual sellers.
And that's the city attorney has said that it's just it's not applicable.
Right. And what we passed on first reading a week ago Monday was clarifying the definition of what it is. I didn't think we needed to because it doesn't apply. He wanted to make it clearer. The downside of that is that it becomes an issue for two months because an ordinance has to pass at two separate meetings, separate monthly meetings. So this has given this thing legs for a couple of months.
But tell me this. But why, I guess, to push back a little bit on that, like it sounds like from what you're telling me, it's like you guys, there was a concern raised and then you're basically going into the reg and saying, okay, it's almost like you're making it less restrictive. Like, okay, we don't want any confusion. We want to make it clear that this act doesn't apply to the farmer's market.
Right. It didn't apply when Gene was the mayor.
I get it, but why wouldn't you guys do the opposite? Like it seems like so I'm gonna ask this like a dumb question. I don't live in Palmetto Bay.
Right.
It seems like to me that maybe the better approach would have been like, David Singer and crew, you're full of crap. This doesn't apply.
Right.
But we're going to err on the side. Like the act doesn't say it. So we're going to amend the act and we're now going to clarify that if you have a farmer's market, we want to have it. That's not what you guys chose. The other path, which was to clarify it doesn't apply.
It doesn't apply.
But I'm saying, what were the politics of that? Does the residents don't want background checks at the flea market? Is that the politics of it?
Actually, I haven't heard outside of a small group of people who orbit David and who show up on Palmetto Bay for Real, which is a Facebook page, and Palmetto Bay Transparency through good looking and brush teething or whatever. Except for them, it's not a big issue in the village because, I mean, we have cops that are there. Cops patrol the area. I mean, this is an attack that was made when the other attacks that a better Palmetto Bay and David were making didn't. David is an accountant, and he thought that with his accountant mind, there's a lizard brain and an accountant mind. And he thought, well, we're going to go out there and we're going to tell people that this fair is causing wear and tear and depreciation. And everybody in town will rise up and say, oh, no, not depreciation. Nobody cared because.
But go back to the ideas. I don't understand the politics of, I guess, as a parent of a child, it does seem to me like, I guess, like I was it done? I guess I just don't get the politics of saying, is it expensive to get the background checks? Like, why don't we just say, if you want to do business on city property, there's kids around, let's just get it done.
If this was,
I'm asking, I'm not advocating, I'm just asking.
I didn't think we needed to change it, but I voted for it.
No, but the idea
well, let's put it in real world terms. You've got a lady out there selling jam. She gets her background check, but one day her 16-year-old daughter says, Mom, can I help? You don't look like you're feeling well. Sure. Well, but if you come and man my booth, we have to now have a background check done on you. And how far do these people pay $40 a month. I mean, $40 a week, $45 a week for these booths. If you start making it too expensive for them and too burdensome for them, then this project is going to fail. And frankly, we gave.
That's the answer. So the answer is the city felt like it's too much to. So I think to understand the city's position is the administrator's position is we don't think the act applies to the flea market. We're going to clarify that, and we feel like the business of it is that it will discourage. It will negatively impact this activity that we want to do. We want to encourage the flea market. We want to encourage the farmers market, right. And having a background check will be a burden on that activity.
Well, we have a background check that was done on Scott Miller because the way that the ordinance is set out, you have to have the vendor who's defined as the person or entity that has the contract with the city. That definition by itself says that it's not the people who sublease, if you will, from Scott Miller to put booths out there. And that was never the intent. It wasn't the intent when Gene was the mayor. It wasn't the intent when Gene was the mayor and Ed was the manager. They didn't look at it this way. So the interpretation is, now all you've got is David and Gene and Ed sniping. I would be curious to have them come down to the council, make a proposal. You've got 3 minutes. But rather than doing that, they're using it as a way to snipe. And after this issue dies, they're going to come up with another issue.
Well, speaking of which, so let's talk about other issues. So one of the media sensations around here was Earth Bunny. Tell me about Earth Bunny. Tell me about the tree. Tell me what is that? Does that go to the wear and tear? How does that fit in with this?
Earth Bunny is someone who I'm not sure was paid by. I suspect it was David or one of his cohorts. It could have been a better Palmetto Bay. I mean, that's a group of developers who kick money into a kitty to put out these things. They may have paid Earth Bunny. They're concerned about one oak tree. We have had an arbor because they claimed that the cement is too close, and that you can't put cement under the canopy of a tree. And this tree has cement up to about 5-6 feet radius. And they claim that that's killing the tree. Well, we've had an arborist come out and tell us, and they've said that that's a sufficient amount of space for the tree. And I don't know what the Earth Bunny's background is in arborism, but when Earth Bunny can show me her diploma from some reputable university, I might pay attention to what Earth Bunny's saying. But until then, no.
Tell me what else is going on in Palmetto Bay? How is Palmetto Bay doing? What is the state of affairs in Palmetto Bay?
I think we're actually doing pretty good. We get by the folks who are on the outs, that we're the laughing stock. We are 5 people on the council. I mean, I don't talk to anybody before a meeting. How are you going to vote? I can't do that. What do you think about this? Can't do that. We have to wait until we all show up, and the issue is before us. We, as a group, I would suspect, if you had to characterize us, we are not crazy about development. One of the issues I'm going to be pushing forward is to stop allowing developers to get credit for the amount of space halfway out in surrounding roadways when configuring density. I don't think that if you didn't build the road, you didn't pay for the road, you just happened to buy a piece of property near the road, that you shouldn't get credit for the road, because you can't build in the road. That's caused some of the developer class a lot of heartache, including my erstwhile opponent. We've got the whole issue with Luxcom. We've already had the 3rd District Court of Appeals say that the way that we set the zoning on that piece of property to be E1, estate, 1 house per acre, was proper. They wanted to go up much higher. And they've made the threat of, well, if you don't let us do that, we're going to build a hospital. Well, it's like, okay. The zoning ordinance says you can build a not-for-profit hospital. So you've got to, if you want to build a hospital, you're going to have to first get the clearance of DERM, the Army Corps of Engineers, because it's right on the water. And I don't think that the guy who owns it, Oscar Barbera, I think is his name, is going to want to take a $33 million piece of property that he bought and turn that over to some not-for-profit. I mean, it's a big charitable write-off, and if he's going to do that, God bless him. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Where is development pressure coming? Are you guys dealing with lot splits? Is this residential, commercial?
We're dealing with lot splits. One of the things I've also been pushing forward is while Gene and Singer and Silva were with the village, we bought what should have been the eastern 2 acres of a particular parcel of property right near Village Hall. But that's not what we got. We got 1 acre plus associated roadways. We were supposed to get 2 acres plus associated roadways. And during the process, after we authorized Mr. Silva to close the deal, the contract went through at least 4 modifications, and none of those ever came back to the village for ratification. So I believe that Ed violated the duty that was imposed upon him. I'm going to be pushing the village to go after the bond that was posted for his faithful performance. I think that Dexter Leighton didn't follow, because he laid out orally what the property description was at the end when they finally approved it. And what we ended up getting didn't anywhere match the property description that he laid out by orally. So I
say the written documents don't reflect
no.
what
In
was
fact,
said orally.
In fact, the ordinance that was passed had a contract attached to it, but the contract didn't have a property description. The property description came from Dexter deciding this is how I'm going to describe it. And that's not what we got. So I think that we've got a good chance of going against the bond that still is out there and we can still call upon. Now, that may have the ultimate effect of affecting Ed Silva, because if he wants to bid on government projects, he may have to be bonded. And if somebody has made a claim on his bond, he may not be able to ever get a bond again. So he may be reduced to doing garage conversions to granny pods, but that's his problem. That's a his problem. That's not a village problem.
It's interesting. I want to address a couple of things in the comments. Again, Brian Tannenbaum, what's his involvement with the?
He's a resident, an attorney. I've known him for a while.
He's asking about my involvement with David Singer about the farmers market. Yes, I am in. David Singer's asking me to look into the enforceability of that language. So I want to be clear about that. Someone else asked about. I'm trying to think. There was one other thing I was going to raise. That issue regarding Dexter Leighton and all that. There seems to be a need for some order put to these things. Like, yeah. I think that,
and that's why I proposed and got the council to adopt 5-0, I believe, a resolution saying that we need to have this entire Shores property thing investigated, including the role that Dexter had and including the role that Silva had. Because you're an attorney, you know that when a client delegates certain authority to you, you have to act within the scope of that authority. You do not have the ability to jump over that line. And if it shows that, so we had a contract with Dexter as our village attorney. He may have breached that contract because of certain covenants regarding his faithful, good performance. He may come forward and say, well, but I hired somebody else to do it. You're the village attorney. You can't pass off the ultimate authority.
And so let me back up, because it's going back to Brian's question to me and that issue. So who is the village attorney that said that the background check issue, that the kind of, we'll call it like the Palmetto Bay Melendi Act is not applicable? Who said that?
That was John De La Gloria.
De La Gloria. So he's our
position. Current.
Yeah, he's the current one that's doing. Okay, right. So gotcha. Okay, so I didn't want to mix up the two things. Right. And then someone keeps asking, Al John Farquharson keeps asking, are you a longtime associate, nay a friend of Leanne Tellum? I don't know if that's to me. I don't know who that is.
Well, Leanne Tellum is our vice mayor. And yeah, when I was
that's directed at you.
I guess so. Oh. When I was practicing law on Biscayne Boulevard, the firm that I was with owned a 2-story building. We rented out part of the bottom floor to a maritime firm. And when they moved in, Leanne was a young associate. So I met her. I often lunched with her in the lunchroom or saw her in the law library. I got to know her. I got to know her as a brilliant young woman. She was a puppy lawyer, as I said, a puppy lawyer. And didn't really, when I left that law firm, didn't really have much contact with Leanne. I have since. I consider her a good friend. She's got a
You don't know where they're going with that question. But so here's what it's interesting, because I got to tell you, as somebody who is involved with litigation with a lot of cities, and maybe it's because of what I do. Like I find it healthy. Like I win some, I lose some,
Sure.
right? But just that process, right? So the idea of the process of going with this, like, I'm not convinced that as we jokingly call it, the government in exile is a bad thing. I honestly, and I want to hear your opinion, but for me personally, I see what's happening and I think, okay, not to bring in proverbs, but iron sharpens iron. We're making each other better, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone involved in this. That David Singer and yours feud is actually to the benefit of us, John Q. Public. Do you view it that way, or do you think it's destructive?
I think that David, Gene, Ed, everybody in Palmetto Bay, people who don't live in Palmetto Bay, have a right to criticize and comment. We've got a format and forum for that at our meetings. If he wants to do it outside of that, that's fine. What the pushback I get from them is, well, we have the First Amendment right to say this stuff, but you don't have a First Amendment right to respond or to criticize back. Now, I try to be creative with my criticism. I've illustrated a number of kids' books. I've written a number of novels. And so I have characters that I've drawn up for David, for Ed, for Gene, and other people. And I frequently use them just like an editorial cartoonist can. And believe it or not, I don't dislike David. But I get that. But that's the person. But I guess what I'm asking is, like, I feel I'm not a resident, but if I was a resident, I'm like, you guys have at it because I'm the beneficiary as a resident. Like having you guys you're both incredibly talented, incredibly intelligent people. Both of you are. And you can point out his character flaws. He can point out yours. We all have character flaws. But in some level, I feel like we're better off with that pushback and the issues being raised. And I don't know how we keep it, positive. I mean, I know you guys are involved in litigation. He sued me for defamation and for extortion.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
And he's also made a complaint to the Miami-Dade County Police Department about me.
You guys are involved in active litigation.
He's suing me and I'm defending myself.
Gotcha.
So I considered suing him for some of the things that he did. And it's like, you get something, you ever walk down to the beach and you get something like tar on your feet and you just want to get the tar. You want to get the tar off of you. You don't want to develop a relationship with the tar. You don't want to know how the tar is feeling. You just want to get rid of the tar. That's my attitude towards David Singer.
Tell me who is his, everyone keeps worrying about who's representing who. Who is David Singer's lawyer in that lawsuit suing you?
That's Michael Peasy, former mayor of Miami Lakes.
Michael. Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Michael Peasy.
Gotcha. I didn't know who was involved. Yep. And you're representing yourself in that.
I'm representing myself. And having a wonderful time. I practiced law for 32 years. I still know how to do it. I'm looking forward. I'm going to be taking the deposition in a couple of weeks of David's employer just to get a number of documents. Eventually, I'm going to take the head of his company. I'm going to be taking the deposition because of issues he's raised of his girlfriend. And just a whole bunch of other people, because he's opened the door now through his litigation. And if he's dumb enough to say that I caused him mental anguish, I get to look at his psychological profile for the last 10 years. I get to look at all of his tax returns and all of his finances and all of his bank accounts for the last 10 years or so. He's the one who came and, took out the glove and smacked me across the face. And, well, if we're going to duel, we're going to duel.
Tell me what else we should be watching for. What are the other, to bring it back to policy, to go back to, I can't remember, what was her name's comment? Was it Emily? Getting it away from these personality issues. What are the greatest challenges you see the Palmetto Bay? And then I want to talk about your goals for Palmetto Bay. But what are the biggest challenges? Hopefully we're coming out of this pandemic.
Right. Well, we are looking at over the next year and a half of receiving about $12 million from the federal government of ARPA funds. And we can do certain things with that. There's some things we can't do. Like some people are saying, well, we dipped into our reserves, took out $3 million to pay Wayne Rosen for that piece of property that got screwed up. We just can't throw money into our bank account and say, yay, we've got to spend it within the guidelines. I want to see if we can take that money and rebuild a community center in Coral Reef Park. My kids, when they were younger, went there for a bunch of different events. My son learned art and drawing there. And it's a great community asset. We could have programs for senior citizens. We could have mommy and me classes. It could be a building that is very, very much used. But we haven't been able to. And because we took money out of the park. But now we can do that. I want us to expand the parks where we can. I'd love to see us set up pocket parks with no parking, but neighborhood parks where you could walk to, because we have some.
Are there any pocket parks?
No.
It's interesting, guys. I got to tell you, that's it's a really interesting issue in certain parts. Like, for example, I live in the city of Miami, and surprisingly, people are against pocket parks. And that has to do with enforcement, right? They become like almost like an open air. There's a concern; it becomes just an open air drug market problems. Where you talk to someone in Coral Gables, they love their pocket parks, right? They're just a place to recreate, to go for a
benches,
walk,
you've got
meditate, spend time outside. So yeah, I would definitely encourage you, to do that. It's an interesting problem because we've never talked about this, you and I. There is this tension in the city, like when you go to a city of Miami meeting with zoning and planning, they will put up a picture of the city, and they'll have all the single family homes in purple, and they will say, we need less purple. We to address housing, we have to have less single family homes. And I think I actually was at a meeting in Pinecrest before I came here. When you go south and you go to Pinecrest, Palmetto Bay, I was visiting a client on an acre of land, and it's always interesting. Like, when I'm on, you don't see that very often anymore. And it's like, it's so lovely, like I was with this older lady, and she's like, I spend an hour every day just picking up palm fronds and walking around, and you see her lifestyle, and it's like, is that under threat? And it's interesting because I feel like people, a decision's going to have to be made. I talked about lot splitting earlier, and like City of South Miami is getting hit with that. Anyone that has over 20,000 square foot lots, that the developers come in, they're offering big time money because they politically can get it done. They can come in, apply, split, get the commission approval, split the lot into two houses. How is Palmetto Bay? Do you have any thoughts on that? Is that something that's happening? Are you guys feeling pressure?
Well, we are. We've got an item coming up at our meeting next Monday, so I'm not going to talk about that item specifically at lot splitting. But one of the big bugaboos in Palmetto Bay has been apartments. We have a bank of apartments that the council has discretion to hand out to developers. I have not voted to hand out a single discretionary apartment. I don't know if I ever will, because I don't think if you can't make money, if you've bought the property and your ability to make money on that piece of property depends upon my exercising discretion, then you probably made the wrong investment. And I think that's probably the feeling of most of the people on our council, is if it's something that's in our code as of right, you can do that. But for instance, a developer right near our village council wanted to put up a multi-story apartment building and was going to be short 90 spaces and wanted a variance. Well, I wasn't going to support that because, if you said 1-2 spaces, well, okay. 90, and their attitude was, well, there's a big lot behind Village Hall, Village owns. We could have everybody park over there. And it's like, no, that's an asset that belongs to the village. Why do you get dibs on it? We may want to put a building back there. We want to make, so if you haven't planned out enough to have enough parking for the apartments that you have, maybe you need to build less apartments.
It's interesting having this discussion with you because I think that, I love these Palmetto Bay issues. Like, I love these questions. I love, these comments that we get, people really drilling down on things.
I'm going to have to read comments. I've got cataracts.
They're continuing to ask
can't
questions about, you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but someone's like, so was it Leanne or Karen who recruited you? I don't know. You can answer that if you want.
It was Shelley Stanzik.
More questions about me and David Singer. Are we filing an injunction? We're working on it. I want to be clear on that. Mr. Tannenbaum keeps asking questions about that. The idea is we're looking into, what is the answer? I got to tell you something. As I stand before you today, like, I'm not sure what the answer is. There's a thing called a declaratory statement, which I'm sure Mr. Tannenbaum's aware of, is the idea of we can seek a declaratory statement saying we don't know.
Chapter 86,
exactly.
Florida statutes.
So we're not,
Yes.
I don't, no decisions have been made about what avenue to go. But anyways, there's a lot of questions about that.
Well, I tell you though, I have read where David has said that he wants to bring. I have publicly said I don't think David has standing because I don't think he can show that he has the kind of specialized harm that would give him the ability to say, I want to go into court and enforce
and
this.
ask this question.
And so I think that you're a grown attorney.
Yeah.
If you want to take the case on, no disrespect to that, I don't know how David gets past the standing question into the substantive issues, because if he doesn't have standing, nothing can be done.
But this is, to me, I'm going to give an example for everyone listening. It's an interesting thing because with these questions about lawsuits and things like that, I remember one time, Key Biscayne. I do a lot of litigation against Key Biscayne. There's a lot going on in Key Biscayne. I'm doing a lot of litigation with Coral Gables. And there's a feeling that some of these municipalities, it's almost like city of Miami is like infecting other cities and how they do business. I'm not saying that's applicable to Palmetto Bay, but I want to give a shout. I'm perceived as somebody who is fighting Key Biscayne government on certain cases, and I am. But I like Key Biscayne. I think it's a good community, just like Palmetto's. I think Palmetto Bay is a good community made up of good people. And one time they did an ordinance, and it was during COVID, and the ordinance was, you can't come into Key Biscayne on a bicycle. And I'd never met Gene Flynn. I'd never heard of Gene Flynn. And he actually was like, I'm a bicyclist. This is crazy. This seems unconstitutional. Will you help us? So pro bono, I wrote a letter to Key Biscayne and I said, knock it off. You can't do this.
Right.
And it was so interesting because the other side, they're represented by Weiss Sirota. And I get a letter back from Weiss Sirota and it's like, Winker, you're full of crap. And it was just like, we're not giving you an inch. Like we think,
sounds like a letter I got from one of David's attorneys.
It's like, this is ridiculous, but we're not going to enforce it. Like, basically go away.
Right.
And I kind of like that letter because it was like, shut up, Winker. And we're not going to give you an inch, but we're not going to enforce the ordinance. And it just was like, does that make sense? Like it was like it was a good way to solve the problem. Because I think I don't know if the city attorney, I don't know if the city manager just hauled off and did it, but I think that they looked at it and was like, whoa, like this is crazy to fight about this. So I throw that out there because I think that this is all good. These discussions are good. And I think that I view the competition of ideas as a positive. I'm not a neutral arbiter because I get paid most of the time, not all the time. And I know you were that. When you were practicing, it was the same thing.
Yep.
A lot of these I don't get paid for. But
I used to tell my wife, I love the law. I just can't stand my clients. And I think that every lawyer you tell that to, they'll say, yep, I understand that.
So I say that because I think that, it would I don't want to call it the Dexter Layton deal, but that deal, would that have benefited from people from outside looking at it, pushing, nudging? Are we really covered? Are we doing this? And so I think that it's almost like, how do we turn this passion, right? There's no other word for it. It's passion. You can say it's negative, positive, whatever, into something positive.
I would love to actually sit down with David, but I got a text from him a couple of weeks ago asking me how my wife is. She's dead. That's what I told him.
Oh.
So I don't see a lot of respect. I mean, we should be able to sit down, and we should be able to work things out, and we should be able to take the personalities out of it and say, you think that this is good for Palmetto Bay? I may not, but explain to me why. I've had countless conversations with people. I have a village phone that I use for village business. That number's on the website. People can call me. I don't have it right now because, but people can call me and ask me and talk to me. I respond to texts. I respond to emails. If I get an email, an email that contains a threat, I probably am not going to respond to it. So that's why I've not been responding to you, David. But I want to help our community, and I want to deal with everyone, not just. I didn't get into this because I wanted to do a favor for friends. I didn't get into this because I wanted to help a developer or stop a developer. If something is a good idea, well, I worked for Bill Sadowski. We have got a park named after him in Palmetto Bay. I was his last legislative aide. I knew him from the time I was 7. One of Bill's credos was a bad idea from a scoundrel, or excuse me, a good idea from a scoundrel is still a good idea.
Yeah.
And that's what I really believe. So I talk to everybody.
Well, and the last thing I'll leave you with is I do find it fun. I do find all this fascinating, and I like the passion, and I think maybe you and I are the same age. I was raised at a time they always say, like, about Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan.
I thought I was a lot older than you.
Are you? I'm 51.
I'm 64. I'm a lot older than you.
Older than me. You look good.
Thank you.
Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan would just say the worst things about each other, and then it'd be like, "What time are you coming over for a drink tonight?"
Right.
And I think that is, I have tried to, and I started my career in DC. I was just, I was working on a K Street firm. It wasn't like I wasn't involved in lobbying or anything. I was a regulatory lawyer, but I did see that. I did see from a young age people that would just be at each other's throats, and then it's like, okay, I'll see you at the golf course on Saturday, and we're doing this other deal together, and I guess maybe that's where I get this idea of the pushing and shoving as a positive.
I don't know if I still have it, but when I was practicing, I had an AV rating by Martindale Hubble. I would get along with, we'd go into court. I was a trial lawyer for all those years. Go into court, you make your pitch to the judge, you make your pitch to the jury, a decision's made. Afterwards, I've been on the opposite side of the courtroom with Ben Cuny, who I have nothing but respect for. And I've been on the same side of the courtroom with him. And I still have, Kendall Coffey.
Yeah.
I've been on both sides and get along with everyone.
Yeah.
And a lot of times your Martindale Hubble rating comes from your adversaries. It doesn't come from your friends. So I'm perfectly happy to deal with anyone. Yeah,
it's interesting. I'm always against Ben Cuny. And I've learned a lot from Ben Cuny. To me, Ben Cuny is like, he represents the bad guys a lot of times. That's what he does as a criminal defense lawyer, right? Yeah. And, I've learned a lot about how he goes about his business. He shows up with a smile on his face, and you do battle. And then, again, it's that thing. I got to tell you something. It's very interesting. Like, when we were in law school, where did you go to law school?
Florida.
Me too. So I'm a Florida grad. And I remember you would go in there, and very early on, they just from day one, it was like, this is a system. You got to play your part in the system.
Right.
And I remember them like, think of the worst offender you can think of. We're talking about Melendi, right? Somebody killing a kid. And it's like, that person needs the best legal representation at every point because the system needs it. And as a young idealistic guy at the University of Florida, I didn't want to hear it. It's like, I didn't work this hard to represent child killers. Right.
Right.
And now today I stand before you and I will tell you, the system only works if everyone gets the best, right? We want everyone at every level held accountable. And I think that is something that again, when I view this, and maybe I'm viewing it, maybe this is all a waste of time, but I like the debate and the competition of ideas. So when I step away, from you and David Singer, it's like that competition. Again, I think the residents are the beneficiary of that battle, and it's going to turn out however it does, right? There's going to be another election in 3 years.
Yeah. I come up in 2024. If I run again, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm enjoying it, but again, I'm 64.
When is Karen Cunningham on the same
No,
cycle?
she's coming up in 2022. District 1 and District 3 and Karen are both coming up.
I'd like to have Karen on the show. I'm going to ask her to come on and talk about stuff. Because I do, again, these discussions are not happening. You guys are one of the more contentious areas.
I mean, well, we have contentions with people. I get along great with Karen. I get along great with Leanne, with Patrick, with Marcia. We don't always agree. And that's fine. But none of us take it so personally that, if you disagree with me on one vote, one resolution, you're my enemy for life. It's like, no, we disagreed. Now let's go on to the next thing. And unfortunately, there are people out there who have this idea that, it's like Donald Trump. I and I alone can solve this problem. Well, no, there's a lot of smart people out there. And it's good to hear from all of them. But the fact that you disagree with them doesn't mean that they're your enemy or you're theirs.
Well, I appreciate you coming on.
Well,
I appreciate your candor. You answered every question everyone asked. I think that I'm honored to be a part of this. I do think that it's cool.
Yeah. What's
going on. And I appreciate everyone that tunes in. I love everyone's passion on this. Eventually we'll find out who Earth Bunny is. And
I know that Earth Bunny is not my daughter because I've never seen them together, but I know they've been in different places at the same time. As to who that should show up in somebody's campaign finance report.
I love it.
But who knows?
Well, thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully we'll be continuing this discussion as we go forward.
Look,
thank you.
A pleasure to finally meet you in person.
Yes, nice to meet you in person.
All right, be well.
Thank you, guys.